Good morning. So previously, I tried to do a flight from Boston Logan up to Montreal. It didn't go well due to a memory leak that pretty quickly shut the game down. In 1.15.9, I was playing around with the helicopter and some other stuff, but this time in 1510, I wanted to give another shot at this flight, except this time I'm going to make it a real one that I've actually done. So I'm going to start here at PHL and fly up to Montreal and see how things go. I haven't fully picked my entire landing approach just yet. Usually, I'm going to say usually, I end up landing on this 06 left runway. That's every time I come in, you fly out to St. Lawrence and then land in. So I'm going to set my approach here in just a second on that. The other thing that I'm doing in this, if you haven't noticed that I have not done before, is I am pulling out the jumbos. This is not to say that the jumbos are not something that you can fly casually. Most of what I try to do on my channel is more for the casual gamer. And hey, sometimes you want to fly a big jumbo and you want to try to do it in a more serious fashion. I mean, anybody can pull out one of these jumbo planes and just screw around in them and have a lot of fun, and that's perfectly acceptable. But if you want to try and do a little bit of the sim experience, it can be a little more daunting to pull out these big jets because there's a lot more to configure. There's a lot more switches. There's a lot more that you just can't find inside the airplanes to make them function right. And I mean, you've seen me occasionally struggle to find where the de-icing system is, where certain light controls are, and how to make the autopilots function quite right in some of the planes that I don't fly very often. So this time I'm going to take it up a notch and do this in a jumbo. Excuse me. The only jumbo I have flown, which was for about 15 minutes, was the Airbus 320 because my nephew had a question on something with the autopilot. Now, he figured it out by the time I loaded in and was doing the same, but that's all right. So the 747 and the 787 I have never loaded in this game, believe it or not, and that's what I'm going to do today. So I'm going to launch the 787, since unfortunately the classic 737 is not in the game, but that's quite all right. And I'm going to see how difficult it is to fire this up and do a quote-unquote semi-sim flight. Essentially, we're going to take off, loop around, fly to the north. We're going to see how difficult it is to configure the autopilot while the engines are powering up and we're getting pushed back. Again, I really don't know how difficult it's going to be to program. Now, in any case, even with the small, like the Learjet and the Cessna jets that I've been flying, CJ4 and Longitude, there's a much greater level of control that you can do if you go into the actual flight computer and start punching in details, but that's a lot more on the sim side and a lot less on the casual side. So I have not messed with any of that because, again, time constraints. I want to be able to jump in, have a quick flight, either just screw around like I was in the helicopter, which was a ton of fun, even though the graphics and FPS was pretty garbage. And I've got some footage I saved from cruising around New York and Egypt in the helicopter that really showed off how rough aspects can be. But it was a lot of fun because you get to see things in a very different light and you feel a lot more connected to it. Let's get this loaded in and let's see how it goes. Alright, now I'm going to zoom out a bit so we can see everything. We've got our heads-up display, which is kind of cool. Not sure what information is going to show on those, but that's pretty nifty. And I believe this will be flight log tracking, other stuff. Cup holders, yippee. And then the massive controls. Large computers, more controls up top, stuff that I'm not going to find anytime soon. But for the purposes of our main flight, we are going to have to figure this autopilot out. So I believe this is autopilot on off. Yep. Inoperable. Yes, don't know what that means. Don't know what that means. I know what you are. Don't know what you are. Okay, I know what that means. heading. Let's get this sucker started up.
Philadelphia clearance delivery American 1811 IFR to Dorval ready to copy.
American 1811 is cleared to Dorval Airport as filed. Takeoff runway 27 left climb and maintain 8,000 feet. Departure frequency is 124.35, squawk 0757.
American 1811 cleared to Dorval Airport as filed. Takeoff runway 27 left climb and maintain 8,000 feet. Departure on 124.35 squawk 0757.
American 1811 readback is correct. Contact ground on 121.9 when ready to taxi.
Guess this is airspeed.
American 1811 requesting pushback. American 1811 pushback request accepted.
We're going to push it to 240 since I'll be under 10,000 feet. Alright, so far not too bad. Oops. These maps are awesome. Great view of the airport and all the spooling up engines. Good MFD stuff. So this is probably a really nice computer to use, but again, this is some of those things that I have no idea what I'm doing. More traditional inputs. Jeez, it's so much. Trims, okay. There we go. I had the parking brake on. Alright, so I am very familiar with this airport, as if you've watched my channel for a while, then you likely are as well, as this is one that I like to play in Tower 3D. Been through this airport about 4 or 5 times now on business trips. I'm curious if he's actually going to do the swing around on me here. Okay, that's a no.
American 1811 request to end pushback received. Philadelphia ground American 1811 with Charlie ready to taxi IFR. American 1811 taxi to enroll short at runway 27 left using taxiway Juliet Tango cross runway 9 left Tango Papa November Sierra Tree. Contact tower on 135.1 when ready.
Okay, I noticed that it looks like once again my dead zones are off. See? Man, why do they reset this every single time you load the game? Now let's get back in flight.
Taxi to enroll short runway 27 left via taxiway Juliet Tango cross runway 9 left Tango Papa November Sierra Tree American 1811.
Alright, so not too bad there. Once we get enough thrust to actually do the turn. What the heck? I'm at 58% thrust and I'm not moving. Okay. I had to go to 90% thrust to get the plane to move. And now it doesn't feel like we're turning very sharply here. Yeah, there's no way I'm going to make this turn because the plane's not turning. Hello, I'm turning. Oh my gosh, something's really wrong here. It's like my rudder's limited. This is full right turn. And I can't make it turn. I'm just going to have to deal with the fact that this large plane is not going to turn. Okay, I'm at the runway.
Runway 27 left, ready for takeoff. IACR to Dortmund.
American 1811 cleared for takeoff runway 27 left.
Alright, we are cleared for takeoff.
27 left, American 1811.
I think this is the view that I had. Yep, there's the cool ass head-up display. Okay. Where is my actual nav mode? Because I don't know how to trigger nav flight. I've got vertical nav, my manual heading. I don't know what that is. I know what that is. I guess I just have to run flight director maybe? Huh. Alright, well, let's get this thing a-moving. Let's throttle up. And release. It is interesting that even though I'm down here, I don't appear to be flying straight at my heads-up display, so they're not lined up, which I don't think is quite right. God, this sounds very good. Coming down on the end of the runway here. Let's gently pull back. We are airborne. Gear up. Let's climb up. I don't know what all that beeping is.
American 1811 contact Philadelphia departure on 124.35.
124.35, American 1811. Philadelphia departure, American 1811 is climbing through 1,300 feet for 8,000 feet.
Okay, I've got an alarm going off somewhere, and I have no idea what it means.
Altimeter 29.902.
Guess that was my flaps. Okay, there's the throttle indicator doing its thing, which is fine. But now, where's my heading? Because I need this thing to turn. So skipped a little bit there, had to do some things manually. And I think we now have this thing on the right track for the navigation to turn and fly us in the right place. I don't know what altitude throttle was.
And maintain flight level
360
360.
I.
Climb and maintain flight level 360, American 1811.
American 1811.
Looks like I can't turn vertical nav off. Alright, now I've noticed on my far right screen that my horizon is not quite level, which makes me think that now I've got navigation working. The rudder's starting to screw up back there. What I'm trying to do at the moment is get my speed up, because I don't know many planes at this altitude that fly at 280 knots, we would be cranking a lot more in order to get there. Let me turn flight director off. See, I can't get my speed going. I will say that it is doing a very good job of staying on the actual line, and it looks like, wow, we've got that memory leak over here still, so I'm gonna not fly this area for a while. Lag. Artificial horizon looks mostly level again, a little bit to the right, but much better than it was. I just cannot figure out how to get my plane to accelerate now. And then autopilot now, once I've engaged some of these settings, I can't disengage them. Like VNav and LNav, all that stuff should be taking better control of the plane. And I can't turn them off to enable my speed. So now I just clicked on the button to enable my speed, and that was an actual accident. That was nothing I had done on my end. And now it seems like throttle's gonna work for me. Cruising speed I think was 455, so I'm just gonna rocket this sucker up and see what happens. I don't think I'm gonna make it to the gate now, but let's get this throttle up here and see what we do. I'm gonna go to 440. We are increasing, so it looks like 360 according to why did it go back to 282? Ugh, give me control. One thing that I've noticed while we're flying here, as we come up on Lake Erie, I believe that's Lake Erie, my FPS has cleaned up quite drastically. So earlier, I was getting probably 8 FPS, and now in the cockpit I'm at about 18 to 20 FPS, so you can see it moves much better. But outside of the plane, like this view right here, I'm cranking 34 FPS peak. And that's just phenomenal. That is a great level of FPS. And I'm really, really excited to be getting that high of an FPS at this level. I noticed a couple other issues while we're starting to make our turn to get to the St. Lawrence. Before we head in and I forget, I've been struggling with the autopilot still with speed control and all of that. But one thing I did notice as I was working on that, trying to go back and forth, wondering why my engines are at 100% and I'm not able to get higher than 278 indicated airspeed, is simply because the game isn't registering the game's ceiling. When I was getting ready to select the airplane, I noticed that its operational ceiling is 35,000 feet, but control has me at 41,000 feet. So I'm operating 6,000 feet above the ceiling of the aircraft, and the higher you go, the less airspeed you can crank through your engines, or for indicated airspeed. because when I look at my total airspeed on the external chart, I'm at 520 knots across the ground right now, which is freaking awesome. But my actual airspeed is like 312 due to altitude and thinness of air and all that stuff. So I'm not actually moving slow. I'm cranking along up here at a beautifully nice speed. But because of the altitude and all that, it's really kind of hampering the actual speed that I can take the plane at. So that's kind of one of the things that I noticed as I was in here going, I've got my airspeed here set for 312 knots just to keep it going. And if I zoom over here to this one, you can see where it's saying your maximum kind of limitation is here. The lower I go, this red line will go up, which is my overspeed line. It will recede away because of the changes in actual airspeed. And that was actually really awesome. You could see the waypoint come through that I'm actually flying over right now. That was pretty sweet. But anyway, that's what was getting me, because I'm looking here going, why am I not able to hit my airspeed? And then when I flip to the external view and they give me that other chart on the far left monitor that gives me my total airspeed and my actual knots and all that stuff, I went, oh yeah. But I was sitting in here going, okay, you've got me flying at 41,000 feet. No wonder I can't throttle up. I'm at max thrust because I'm so high up that the plane's not designed to go any faster. And then I came externally and went, yeah, I'm actually hauling it here, which is a bit faster or fairly reasonable where the planes would actually be moving at this altitude. But kind of fun to see some of the stuff that I would normally have seen, because I've flown this flight plan from an actual plane, so it's kind of funky to be heading this way. And very soon we should start our descent, because we're coming up on the St. Lawrence, which is right here up in front of me. So we should be starting our descent before long.
1811 cleared to land runway 06 left. Wind 285 at 7. Cleared to land runway 06 left American 1811.
Landing gear, 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 landing gear. 300. American 1811.
So not much commentary to provide on that overshoot. Two things happen there. One, most of it is the autopilot here. Because I could not get this stupid thing to disengage the speed. Like right now, I want to turn that off. Autopilot is not running, and I could not get my speed to slow down. So I was trying to do a whole bunch of other stuff, and instead of like dropping this indicated airspeed and continually pulling it down, as I was making sure autopilot was coming into the runway, I was down at like this view, checking my alignment and stuff. And trying to get my altitude to go down. The airspeed system and the altitude system were fighting each other. So I'm trying to get the plane to start descending as the system told me to, but it just was not going down fast enough. It was going down at just a few hundred feet per minute, and it was just so slow. And that meant that when the call came to go from 29,000 down to 17,000, I wasn't ready for it. And then when the call came to go down from 11 to 4,200, I was still at 20,000 feet or so, not even close to being ready to come down. So I had to take manual control with vertical airspeed and drop myself down at ridiculous levels. But because the thrust system was still doing its thing in the background for some reason, I then needed to continue alternating between the two. And you saw a couple of times I had to hit the vertical airspeed setting multiple times to finally get the plane to drop down enough. But that meant that when I finally got low enough to trigger approach control, I was still moving at 350 stinking knots or faster. I hit overspeed multiple times in that because I just came down like a rocket instead of a smooth controlled descent. And then when I hit approach control, I again assumed, like the other planes, thrust and other things would be pulled back a little more to handle it. But instead, auto thrust continued to throttle me up. So when I finally got my thrust down to about 250, I was able to engage the first set of flaps. And that slowed the plane enough that I could get the landing gear down. With those two, I created enough drag to drop my flaps to level 2. And then my airspeed finally dipped below 200. But at that moment, the thrust kicked back up on the engines, and you can't see it, but when I go outside, I have 2 engine modules off to the far left of my screen, and I saw the thrust starting to increase again, up to 50, 60, 70%, and that is when it really started becoming a problem. So I think I came inside real quick to just do the force kill of autopilot so that I could kill my engine thrust, which I did on my stick. I just dropped the thrust to 0, but these planes don't stop on a dime. No plane does. So I used 2/3 of my entire landable runway just to slow down. And then finally I was able to get control of my throttle, and I threw it into thrust reverse. I had full braking engaged so that when my nose gear did hit the runway, I was full braking to try and slow down. So I don't know what in this system was conflicting with this system, but this is just an understanding of how the system works. Because the turning system, I had to engage LNAV. And you see, I can't get all of these things to disengage and engage properly. I can't turn auto thrust off. I don't know how to do it. It just doesn't want to work anymore. So there are some glitches with the autopilot. A lot of this was just me as a casual player being unable to come in here and figure it out for the first time. Now that does not mean you can't spend a couple minutes watching a tutorial on YouTube to figure out what the different buttons do and how they conflict with each other. I think I've got enough of an understanding now to be able to come in here and set some different limitations to what the system is doing. And at least now I know how to come in and manually override it with vertical airspeed to come down from such a high altitude faster. I did maintain a higher speed because I wanted to get there faster, but by the time I hit, let me bring my map over, you can see the 2 main waypoints that brought me in. By the time I hit X Ulta, I should have been at 4,200 feet. I kicked on autopilot, or not autopilot, approach at this point, and it dropped me below the 4,200, which is fine. I was transferred to the tower, and they had given me clearance to land. So that means that there was nothing in front of me that was really going to be a problem, and approach could do its thing. But when I was coming in, I came in on HABs, Arrive, and then MSS, and a couple others from down below as I made my turn in. I should have been at about 11,000 feet by MSS, and then that's about when I started getting my descent to 4,200. By the time I hit Arrive and HABs, I should have been about 5,000 or closer. I got passed off to the tower around HABs, and I got clearance to land as I was making my left turn into Exulta. And that's when I should have been starting to engage my autopilot and dropping down. So it was pretty hectic in the cockpit because of all of that. And I could have slowed you probably saw me change my indicated airspeed around the time I started getting to the 4,200 mark down to 250, because you're not supposed to fly faster than 250 knots below like 12,000 feet. And then I was going to drop it down to, you saw me try to scramble to do it because I was fighting the altitude levels, but I was trying to slow down to get closer to 180, 185, so that by the time I got close enough to the airport, I could be much slower in my thrust and speed, and it just did not work out. So the plane itself was good to fly. It handled pretty decently close enough to the ground, and part of that is because it is such a large aircraft and generates so much lift that I don't have the same issues fighting the controls that I do with the Longitude or the CJ4. I'm not sure why those particular airplanes are so twitchy, but that's again, discussion for my other videos. But there's enough flight controls and things here that one really doesn't have a whole lot to freak out about and worry about. Unfortunately, we shot off the runway and crashed because I couldn't slow down in time, but we did make it there. Now, maybe if the controls had actually turned properly, I could have done it, but that I don't know about, unfortunately. But it was a lot of fun to fly the plane. It looked good in the sky. It handled well. Autopilot did a fantastic job of actually controlling the airplane properly, getting me where I needed to go, which I thought was very good. Again, just the kind of fighting with the control scheme. So Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.